Mahabharata is a Dharma Shastra, helping us to understand what is our duty. And we see that Vedavyasa comes to Satyavati, his mother, to be able to help her. So when we take up the path of renunciation, actually we renounce family, we renounce any responsibility in terms of grahastha. But there is a responsibility in terms of serving the society. The sannyas dharma does require the giving back to society, giving more than what we consume. That line that comes in Puja Gurudev's pledge is really sannyas dharma. That in the vows of sannyasis, nobody should ever be afraid of us. Nobody should ever feel we have taken something that is theirs. Nobody should ever feel threatened and so actually quite interesting that Vedavyasa comes. So firstly, Vedavyasa gives his mother this promise before he leaves. He's a born sannyasi, but he, of course, when he's born and he grows up, at that point she's his mother before he leaves. And so since he leaves and he doesn't serve her in any other way, his duty as a son, he decides to fulfill by giving her the promise that when she needs, he will come. Also, when she does call him, she's calling him under the rules of that era in time, where if a king leaves or dies without being able to leave an heir to the throne, a rishi can secure a child with the queen to allow the lineage to continue is part of Dharma. That was acceptable conduct at that point in time. And so Dharma we see here also, there's the universal Dharma that continues, that never changes. And then there's societal norms which are acceptable, which is considered Dharma in those period of time. Now, why would this have been considered acceptable? Because when somebody is being asked to procreate, then we naturally want to ensure that it's free of lust, because they're doing it as a duty, they're doing it as a service. We want to ensure that their frame of mind is one that's free of lust. Also, if you continuing a lineage and procreating, then the quality of your mind will definitely affect the quality of the child, which we see in the case of Vedavyasa, that the mother's mind affects the child. So of course the father's mind affects the child as well. And so if somebody is being called to procreate as a duty, then we want to ensure that their mind is pure, noble, strong, all these wonderful qualities. So rishis were asked because they were doing tapas. They were anyways purifying themselves. They were living in discipline. And so their quality of mind would be appropriate. And also the chances are that they wouldn't get swept away with the indulgence of the act, or the sensuousness of the act. And they'd be respectful about it. Nor would they get highly attached to the child that was born. And so for all these reasons, a rishi was called to ensure the lineage continues. So when Vedavyasa comes to do this deed for his mother, it's his dharma to his mother, which he promised her before he left. It's also the rishi dharma at that time. But again, there was a lot of rules, like, there was a limit to how many times it can be done. There was in between each occasion of when he did meet the queens, he had to do a certain amount of tapas. And ideally, the queens would have had to do tapas as well. And so we see in the second incident, Ambalika does. Ambika doesn't get a chance to because Satyavati is anxious. But Ambalika does do a little bit of tapas. And that's why we see that when Pandu is born to her, he is definitely more noble. He's definitely more pure and strong and capable as a person. And then the servant is extremely devout, extremely strong in mind and in heart. And so Vidur is born to her. But here, I guess what I wanted to emphasize is Dharma is this giving back. So my mother gave me life. I give her back something. Whatever it is that she would ask for, he would have given. And in this case, she asked for this. And so he gave this. But even him giving it to his mother as his Dharma, giving back to his mother, was still not contradictory to his Dharma of living this life of renunciation. Also, in those days, rishis did marry. And so we see, we have lots of stories where in the ashramas, the rishis were living a life of grahastha while they pursued also their spiritual practices. Of course, Vedavyasa himself never did. And that's not the path he chose. But we have these incidences which interlinks him very and entwines him very closely into the story of the Mahabharata. So we see that when we're looking at Dharma, there has to be the universal Dharma of who I am as my divine essence. And then when we're looking at Dharma, it's very time-bound. And today's society, what is considered acceptable. But it's not just what's considered acceptable by social norms. There is a following of some discipline. So here too, Vedavyasa, he bore a child with the first queen, did tapas for 6 months, bore a child with the second queen, did tapas for a year, I think, because Ambika was still pregnant, right? So she had to deliver the child and then be ready to be able to conceive again. So it was about a year. And then he drew a limit. So when the mother asked for a 4th child, no. And so we see that in Dharma, doesn't matter what the rules are, the most important thing is we have a line that we don't cross. Even if I'm doing this for paying back to society, even this I'm doing this for gratitude to my parents, there's a line that we don't cross. And maybe that line is determined by social norms, but definitely in terms of ourselves, our swadharma, there's a line that we draw for ourselves. So certain things that we just won't do. Certain things we might compromise on. Certain things we just won't do. And then sometimes people think that this is rigidity of personality. But each one is to draw their own line. So it can be that I'm fairly flexible in certain areas until this point. And some people's line might be closer and some people's line might be further. And that's determined by how much strength of mind we have. For example, with food, because food's always the easiest example. I know people who will just not touch it. Because the minute I put one piece in my mouth, I'm going to want the second piece and I'm going to want the third piece. So their line is no. There's no even leeway to play with because they know that their level of control, once the first bite goes in, is very minuscule. Whereas I know for myself, if I have one bite, usually I'm happy. Right? So the line will be after that, no, thank you. And then actually I've had, so, it's like I've had, I can even say, I've had, I'm good. This is of course because I live in a more public era where people are constantly offering me things, but I think everyone, right? All of us socialize and all of us get offered numerous times, numerous things by different people. And so all of us get put in this position where we're having to say no. And it's much easier to be able to say, I've had, than to say, no, leave me alone, don't bug me. So we find a line. And so I've mentioned this many times. Mine is 2 bites. I'll usually stop at 1. If I really like something, I'm allowed 2 bites. 3, no, that I won't cross. So I fix it, understanding what I need and how my mind works. And so what's your dharma? Actually, you have to fix those rules for yourselves. And play with the way that we do it. But the most important aspect of it is there is discipline. And I have a check for myself not to overindulge. Now, I might indulge. I'm not saying I never indulge, but that line stops me from ever overindulging. And actually, even though we're doing the Mahabharata, this point is brought out extremely beautifully in the Ramayana. In the Ramayana, Ram, Sita, and Lakshman are living beautifully in the forest, literally beautifully. Like, you know, you've never heard of a romance more beautiful than Ram and Sita while they were in the forest. He used to tie her hair and put flowers for her while they were living in the forest. Now, which husband is sitting putting flowers in his wife's hair? They did so nice their time was in their forest. And one day in the 13th year, Sita sees this golden deer. The golden deer was a trick. Ramchandraji knew it was a trick. Lakshman knew it was a trick. Lakshman, who doesn't talk much, when Sita ji says, I want that deer, Lakshman starts, it's a trick, don't go. But he doesn't speak to Sita ji, he speaks to Ramchandraji. And Ramchandraji says, I know it's a trick, but let me go because, you know, after all, I'm Ram, so what can go wrong? A few things went wrong. So Ramji goes off in search of the golden deer. And even Ramji going off in search of the golden deer is a necessary part of the story of the Ramayana, because Sita, as she represents the Jivatma, sends Ram in search of gold. Us as Jivatmas send away our happiness in search of gold. So it's the story is all proper, how it's meant to be. And then Ramchandraji says, Lakshman, you don't leave her. And it's quite a do not leave her. What is Lakshman? Vairagya. And Lakshman is also discipline. You see Lakshman's life. You know, he gave up sleep. To be able to give up sleep, the level of discipline you need. Gosh. No. Sitting in Vedanta class, only so many people keep doing this. They're giving up sleep. Like Lakshman did not sleep. So anyway, Sita ji says some really harsh things. Lakshman can't bear to hear it. Says, okay, fine, I'll go. But please remember, it's Sita that sends Lakshman off. She's sending off discipline. She's sending away Vairagya. So first we send away our happiness. Bye-bye, gone. Then we send away discipline and detachment. Lakshman thinks, okay, I'm going, but I leave a line. And he draws that line around the Kutyas. In original Ramayana, it's actually not there. Tulsidas Ji's and Eknath Maharaj's and in Kamba Ramayana, all of them have it. So more Ramayans have it than not. Lakshman draws this line, the Lakshman Rekha. Means, okay, you indulge, but this line don't cross. Because once we cross it, there's no going back. So the first time you lie, then you're okay to lie. Like if you're following a routine and the minute you break it, now suddenly it's okay to break it. You say something harsh to someone, and now suddenly you just keep saying harsh things to whoever and whenever you feel. But until you maintain the discipline, it's maintained. So don't cross this line. This, like within this, you indulge, enjoy, but within this line. This is that line of Dharma where once you cross this line, it becomes adharma. You lose the ability to stay disciplined. And when Ravana comes, to Sita's credit, she doesn't cross the line. And she's safe. And Ravana can't enter into the area where she is because that line is too strong. Who's Ravana? Ravana is incredible indulgence in adharma, selfishness, greed, possessiveness, jealousy. It can't enter. It can't enter as long as we stay within that line of discipline. That's why I said it's important where we draw this line, and it's important each one of us draw it in a place where it works. Ravana is very clever, and we should know this. The world is very clever at tempting us. Very tricky. Lots of advertisements keep coming up, pop-ups on your Instagram to catch your attention. Don't even look. And he tricks her by making her scared that Ramchandraji will be in danger if she doesn't cross the line. So interesting. Interesting that she thinks Ram can actually be in danger. Secondly, she sent him away, and now to keep him safe, she crosses the line. Our mind doesn't think clearly. So what makes us cross the line? Fear. And it's usually fear that we're not going to get what we want. That's what will make us cross that line. Then the moment she crosses that line, she's miserable, beyond belief. Ramchandraji is miserable, Lakshman's miserable, everyone's miserable. Even Ravana is miserable because he can't really have her. So nobody's happy in the situation. But for as long as that line was maintained, Ravana was kept at bay. Sita had hope. Ramchandraji would have come back and been able to deal with Ravana. Dharma is me creating my limits. After this, I won't do. Up to this, okay. Right? After this, no. Each one of us need to be clear on where that is. In terms of daily discipline of food, speech, and sleep, but more importantly, in terms of relationships, in terms of who we are, and how we want to conduct ourselves, in terms of how much we're going to be patient, accepting. Of course, we must increase these abilities. How much we're going to tolerate injustice, how much we're going to tolerate pressures put on ourselves. And then when we fix this line, remember, because it's a line of Dharma, it's not meant to hurt others. It's meant to keep us safe. And so the idea is not, I want to keep others out. That's not the idea of the line. The idea of the line is, my mind is kept safe because I know my limits. So others are loved. Please remember, Dharma means love. So if you're telling me to eat the cake and I don't want to eat the cake, I love you. I won't eat the cake. I can't start hating you because you're making me eat the cake and I don't want to eat the cake. That's not Dharma. Dharma is no thank you. But I continue to love you, whoever you is, and in whatever the scenario is. So that's what Vedavyasa did. He drew the line. And we'll see today also Kunti will be drawing a line. And Yudhishthira drew his line very close. Yudhishthira didn't transcend Dharma very, very hardly. he kept Dharma utmost. But Bhima and Arjuna a little bit further. And they were still within Dharma. But they allowed a little bit more anger, a little bit more jealousy, a little bit more masti. Arjuna allowed quite a bit of masti actually. But he was still within Dharma. The line was still there. Duryodhana doesn't keep a line. He'll do anything. And Karna, before he meets Duryodhana, he had a line, but he also didn't keep it very well. This is why Kauravas are the side of our Dharma. It's not that they were horrible people. They had good qualities, but that line wasn't drawn, and so they weren't maintaining and living Dharma. So we need to have this clear idea, and in terms of our sadhana, in terms of our spiritual progress, we have to be able to draw these for ourselves. Okay, so where are we in the story? They born. Dhritarashtra's born, Pandu's born, Vidur's born. They grow up beautifully. Like I said, in the Mahabharata, long periods of time goes, and there's no story because nothing that significant happened. But this is the point in the when Pujya Gurudev used to teach the Bhagavad Gita, this is the point where he would start teaching in this part of the Mahabharata, because he always linked Bhagavad Gita back into Mahabharata. Excuse me. So now it's time for them to get married. Who? Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidur. And so Dhritarashtra grew up to be very, very, very strong, physically very, very strong. Pandu grew up to be quite nice. Like he was, what's the word? Forthcoming. He was efficient as a king. He was proactive. He would do things. So in fact, during the reign of Vichitraveer, not much happened in the kingdom. Bhishma was running the kingdom. And then while Pandu was growing up, not much happened in the kingdom. Bhishma was ruling the kingdom. And when Bhishma was ruling the kingdom, he had to stay in Hastinapur because he had to look after the kids also, right? But when Pandu finally became the king, he realized that for 2 generations, things had been neglected. Nobody went traveling, nobody went on tour, nobody went. So Pandu goes. Pandu goes on this huge tour and, makes sure all the surrounding cities are like, loyal to Hastinapur, and he collects the taxes and he fights with whoever needs to be fought with, and he establishes domain of Hastinapur and the Kuru line, the lineage. So in fact, he comes back after these years of travel with so much wealth. And this is an interesting thing about the Mahabharata. It's definitely not a spiritual scripture from a point of view of, because indulgence is described quite extensively, and wealth is described quite elaborately, like the color of the pearl and the shape of the pearl and the size of the pearl and the diamond and the shining of the diamond, carpets and potteries and mirrors, and this is all the wealth that Pandu collected. It's like 3 pages of describing how many fancy things he collected. I'm like, this dude fits into Hong Kong. So Pandu was, the reason I'm mentioning this is because Pandu did a good job of ruling and establishing the wealth of Hastinapur. So now if Hastinapur is wealthy, of course Bhishma has been doing for 3 generations, but Pandu brought in a lot of wealth. And so now the wealth that is in Hastinapur belongs to Pandu. And so technically, tend to his kids. The Dhritarashtra hasn't done anything. Like nothing. Literally nothing. In the whole story of how you're reading. He sits symbolically, like every time there's a ceremony and you need a king, Dhritarashtra sits. Because Pandu is usually off doing something. And so the Dhritarashtra would hold that ceremonial post of king. Okay, so wives, they had to get wives. Bhishma had this poor guy. He was now really determined that everyone should have kids. And so he needs to stop being ruling the kingdom, make sure they have kids, make sure the lineage continues. So Pandu had grown up beautifully. Dhritarashtra had grown up to be very strong. Vidur grew up amazing, incredibly intelligent. So Vidur was said to be an incarnation of Yamraj, an Amsha of Yamraj. How does this work? So remember, the positions of the deities are souls that hold that position. So in one lifetime, he was Yamraj. Now he's born here on earth. Why would somebody who was Yamraj be born now back on earth? Number one, we can only get moksha in a human life. So you can be Yamraj, but that's not the most powerful birth. More powerful birth than Yamraj is to be born here on earth in a human life. Second, when you Yamraj, if any of you are interested in the position, you become very, very wise. Because there's nothing like death to help us learn what's important. And there's nothing like death for us to be able to understand consequences of action. And so Yamraj is incredibly wise and will always do the right thing, because in the wisdom can see what's the consequences of the actions going to be. When we see the consequences of our actions very clearly, we will choose intelligently. We will choose compassionately. And so there's also a story about he was cursed. Who? Vidur as Yamraj was cursed because he was a bit too severe in his sentencing of some rishi. But never mind, too many stories and too many stories. He's still a good guy. He was born here as Vidur. And then, but now, so what was the first reason? Only in human life we can get moksha. Second reason was he was born extremely wise and noble as Yamraj. So now that he's wise, of course he'll want moksha. And having been Yamraj, there's a lot of tapas in being Yamraj. There's a lot of spiritual growth in being Yamraj. But the most important reason he came to be born on earth as Vidur. Vidur is one of the greatest devotees of Lord Shri Krishna. Like everybody knows Radha and Sudama and all those really cute stories of Krishna. But Vidur's love for Krishna was incredible. Incredible, incredible, incredible. So much was Vidur's love for Krishna that when Krishna was leaving this earth, he remembers Vidur and he leaves a message or a teaching for Vidur. Like imagine how much he must have loved Krishna, that Krishna loved him that much, that Krishna was going to leave, bye. He left Rukmini, he left Radha, he left everyone, he left Arjuna, he left Yudhishthira, he thought that they can figure things out. Who does he remember? He remembers, wait, what's his name? Oh, I forget his name. The one that's with him, the one that wears his clothes. It'll come to me. And he, who? Rishma, who?
Uddhav.
Uddhav's there, no. He does remember Uddhav. Is Uddhav the one that wears his clothes?
I think so.
Yeah, okay, maybe it was Uddhav. And he remembers Vidur. Because he sends Uddhav to Vidur, right? Yeah, I think so. So, he comes as Vidur. So is Vidur Yamraj? Well, we don't know if he's Amsha of Yamraj or if he's the same soul that now has taken a different birth. But it seems more like it's the same soul that now has taken a human birth and was once Yamraj. And so Vidur and Yudhishthira will have this link because Yudhishthira is born too of Yamraj. Today we'll see that's happening. Maybe today. Let's see what happens. Maybe it won't be today. I'm going too slow. What are we doing? Vidur was very wise. And now Bhishma, this is what I wanted to tell you. Finally, because Vidur was so wise and so noble and so good, Bhishma kind of little bit relaxed. He stopped really watching. he stopped really paying attention. And so Duryodhana goes from bad to worse, and he doesn't notice. Because now he's a little bit chilled because Vidur is there. And in a way, Dharma, you have to do your duty and you have to, but you know, when you hand it down, not that this is an excuse for Bhishma, but there's the sense of it's being done. It's being looked after. Unfortunately, Duryodhana didn't listen to Vidur, whereas he would have listened to Bhishma. But yeah, all these things play. All these things, you'll see it in life. You'll see it all the time in life. Somebody gets old enough and then they don't want to have to deal with the nitty-gritty of everyday life. It's like, yeah, I've done my share. Yeah, I already feel like that, and I'm not even that old. Okay, now, wives. Bhishma went to Vidur and asked, who do you think would be a good wife? I have thought of Gandhavri for Dhritarashtra. Why Gandhavri for Dhritarashtra? She is very noble, number one. Two, she was being given a boon by Lord Shiva that she will have 100 kids. And Bhishma had one agenda on his mind. There should be kids. I don't want to be left again without kids. If he marries Gandhavri, Dhritarashtra will have 100 kids. Sorted. And then for Pandu, I have thought of Kunti. Vidur is very, very, very sweet. He says, you know, as you wish, we will listen to whatever you say. But Bhishma didn't go for that reason. Bhishma actually went to Vidur because he thought Vidur was worthy of a second opinion. Like, do you approve? And Vidur did. And so, who's Kunti? Vasudeva is a character that you might remember, is Krishna's father. Vasudeva's sister is Kunti. Vasudeva's father's brother cannot have children. So the brother takes Kunti as his daughter. So Vasudeva and Kunti are brother and sister, but they grow up in two different households. And this was common practice. I guess adoption wasn't available in those days, but this is how they did it. They would take a family member as their kid because they believed that at least my child will be brought up with the same love. It's my, you know, it's still blood. So Kunti was brought up by her chacha and family, but Vasudeva and Kunti have this bond. And that's why Kunti and Krishna have a bond. Kunti is incredibly noble. She is so devout, so disciplined, so pure at heart, that she was always chosen to be the one who would serve the rishis. Dhruvas Rishi comes to live in her house. Kunti serves for many, many months. Dhruvas Rishi is easily angered, and so she was told to be particularly devout, which she was, and when he's leaving, he gives her a boon that she can summon any of the devatas and have children with them. At this point in time, she's 16. You know, why would a rishi give somebody such a boon at 16? But then I guess the story, maybe he could see into the future and he knew that she would need to. But as a 16-year-old, when you get a new toy or when you get a power or when you get anything, you get curious. After Dhruvas Rishi leaves, having given her this boon, Kunti looks at the morning sun. The morning sun is very beautiful. Sunset is beautiful, but sunrise has this different charm. Everything's fresh, everything's new, everything's crisp. And looking at the sun, she thinks, how beautiful is the sun? How handsome must be Surya Devata? And she thinks, I wonder if the mantra works. and she chants it. And she's very innocent because when Surya Devata turns up, she, of course he's handsome, he's Surya Devata. She thinks, oh great, I've seen you and that's it. He's like, that's not what the mantra says. And so she conceives his child. She's 16. She's scared. She's confused. She's scared. But this child, born of Surya Devata, was born brilliant. He was resplendent, born of Surya Devata. He was born with earrings that gave him strength and a kavacha, a protective armor of gold, literally sunlight, literally solidified sunlight keeping him safe. Nothing could penetrate that armor. And so you would recognize this child anywhere because of the kavacha. It's his second layer of skin, the kavacha. And this is how you know that they were born of devatas, because who's born with this? Who's born with a golden kavacha? But because she was scared, in today's world, maybe we would say you could do things differently, and maybe even in those days you could do things differently, but each one of us does the best we can in that moment of time. And maybe it's not our best, maybe it's our worst, but in that moment of time, that's all we can think of to do. And so it was her worst, but it was the only thing she could think to do at that moment. She wraps him up in a blanket and she lets him float down the river. Interesting, you find the similar analogy in Egyptian parallels and Greek mythology. So much of what we see in the Mahabharata and in our Hindu scriptures, you'll see parallels in other mythologies. And so either they're universal themes or this somewhere one was original and then it got copied. I guess we'll never know, but it's interesting that there are parallels. So I think that was done with Moses as well. Moses was floated down the river. I think not very good with other scriptures. Just getting a grip on ours. So this young baby is called Karna, born of Surya Devata. And he's a very significant part of the Mahabharata. So he's Kunti's first son, who she abandoned. But Karna was destined to have a very, very, very loving mother. He was found and was adopted by a family, and Radha, her name was Radha, his adopted mother, desperately, desperately, desperately wanted a child and couldn't have one. And when they found him in the river, they felt God had sent them what they had prayed for, and they cherished him. He received so much love. Like he himself will tell, he says in the Mahabharata that he received so much love, and he would be called Radheya because he said, nobody loves me as much as my mother, and so my name is, I belong to Radha, Radheya. That's what he gets called the most frequently in the Mahabharata. He's referred to as Radheya more often than anywhere else, especially when he's introducing himself. And so, yes, he was abandoned by Kunti, but he received so much love. And this is an interesting thing about our minds. He received so much love. He himself acknowledges he received so much love. He renamed himself to make sure his mother's name was in his name. And yet he was haunted by the fact that he was abandoned. It's interesting how we hold on to what we don't have. Do all of us do it? No. But more of us do it than not. And, children who have been adopted, I think 99% of them will want to find their original parents. It's only but natural. But the intensity of that feeling of I am love versus I am abandoned. And even though it's very natural to feel I am abandoned. And whatever we think within our early childhood and our first 4 years of our life gets very etched in our thinking. And it becomes, well, actually, let me rephrase that. It becomes our programming, not our hardwiring, but our programming. And we can reprogram it at any given point in time. So within the first 4 years of our lives, we create the programming that then operates our thinking. But at any age, we can reprogram. Unfortunately, and Karuna is a great example of this, we don't reprogram. So Karuna programmed, I was abandoned. He found immense love. He didn't reprogram. And so that feeling of being abandoned was a thorn in his heart. And this is why Karuna gets loved by so many people. You feel sorry for him. Vicharo, he was abandoned. I understand that. I really do. But he got love. God doesn't abandon us. Kunti abandoned him, but God didn't. God sent him love, an incredibly loving mother, an incredibly loving father. I mean, when you read the Mahabharata, oh my gosh, his father was so proud of anything he did. If he stood up, his father was proud of him. Like anything he did, his father was so proud of him. And that sweetness, that sweetness of that love that he gets from both his parents. Yeah. But unfortunately, he gets called Sutaputra, which means chariot driver son, which just doesn't sit well with him because it's not his Swadharma. Okay, so Kunti. Kunti was this incredibly noble woman who has Karna out of wedlock from Surya Devata because she has this boon where she can invoke the Devatas. Nobody knows of this incident, and so Kunti is married to Pandu. Kunti believes that if people knew of this incident, she would not get wed. Is that true? I don't know. How to know? Even I guess she didn't know. But this is another interesting thing. And I gave homework last week about conception and creation. And then before I ended the class, there was the question, if I want it, why don't I get it, right? Did y'all play with conception and creation? Did y'all create anything? Okay, so if I conceive it, why won't I create it? This is pretty much it. What? I don't believe it. Kunti believed she had to hide Karna from the world. And nobody would marry her if she didn't. That's what she created. It brings her so much heartache. Kunti is not happy for a single day in her life. Not one. Why? Because after she gives Karna up the way she does, she doesn't give him up, right? She abandons him. She doesn't believe she deserves to be happy. And so she's not. Not a single day in her life is she happy. Not even the day Yudhishthira finally gets the crown. That's the same day she leaves. So she marries Pandu, and Bhishma thinks, well, Dhritarashtra is blessed with 100 sons, but we don't have the same blessing for Pandu. How to make sure Pandu has lots of kids? Because remember, Bhishma has this one single goal in his life, making sure that they have kids. He thinks, okay, let's make sure he has 2 wives, so at least one of them will have kids. And he goes up and he gets Madhavi for Pandu. So Pandu has Kunti and Madhavi. And there is this little bit of a sense of there is some little rivalry between Kunti and Madhavi. And I guess that's only natural when you co-wives. But by and large, Kunti is very, very noble. And Madhavi described not so much as noble as she is beautiful. Interesting that Mahabharata makes this divide. They can't be beautiful and noble in the Mahabharata, hardly ever. Either they focus on how beautiful you are or how noble you are. But Kunti is beautiful, and I'm sure Madhavi was really sweet and nice as well. It's the way literature has to be written, because it's written more of a story than it is written as a scripture. So this is the part where Gurudev would focus on, not this bit. The bit I'm about to tell you is what Gurudev would focus on. Dhritarashtra and Gandharvi have 100 sons and 1 daughter. And the way it comes to be is Dhritarashtra wants to have a child before Pandu and is very keen. And then in the interim, he hears that Kunti had a child. And so he gets really upset that no, Pandu had a child first. No, no, no. And he forces Gandharvi to give birth, even though she's not given birth naturally. And this is also very interesting that Gandharvi was pregnant for 2 years. So something's not quite right there, right? You can't be pregnant for 2 years. With the exception of Vyasa's wife herself, because Shukdev didn't want to come out. But he could speak in the stomach, and he was narrating Upanishads, so we'll exclude him from normal behavioral practices. And then it's said that she forces labor, and what's born is a lump of flesh. And then again, the Dhritarashtra calls Vedavyasa, who's his father, and Vedavyasa cuts up the ball of flesh into 100 pieces and puts them in jars with ghee. That's the description given. But if you draw parallels to what is given, it sounds like what we call today as cloning, where you divide a cell and it replicates. A ball of flesh could literally be a fertilized egg, could be described as a ball of flesh. When the Mahabharata was translated, a lot of technology that we have today was not known. And so how do you translate something that's not known? Like they translate flying chariot in the Ramayana, whereas today we would translate it as airplane. But 200 years ago, when there was no airplanes, and they said something was flying in the sky, the only thing you could think of that traveled was a chariot, and they translated it as flying chariot. So sometimes with the translation of the actual words, it's not quite precise. So what happened with Gandharvi and the 101 children? This much we know. Vyasa came along, he created the 100 from the 1, and then just as he was about to leave, Gandharvi said, you promised me 100 sons, and I'm very grateful for that, but I'd really, really like a daughter. So he said, okay, and he gives Dushala. So how is Vyasa doing this also? Is it science? Is it mysticism? It's unclear what it is. But there's 101 children, 1 daughter, 100 sons. Pandu's story is a little bit more complicated. I'm not going to go into the details, but Pandu's weakness is that he used to love to hunt. And so he would hunt. And so this was just unnecessary killing. He enjoyed hunting quite a bit. And so in one incident when he was hunting, he shoots a deer, and the deer was having intercourse. And apparently, as per the rules of hunting, you're not supposed to shoot when an animal is having intercourse. Now, interesting that there's all these rules about hunting. So remember, I said Dharma is about rules. Who sets these rules? Well, social norms. But also we have to set the rules. So why hunt in the first place? If you're going to hunt, have some rules. So in a lot of the stories in the Puranas, there was this pride of, I can shoot just by listening. And so they didn't actually see what they were shooting, which is what Pandu did. He heard the deer and he shot. So happened. He's luck. Proud of that. This is why Mahabharata talks a lot about destiny. Just his luck that the deer he shot wasn't a deer. It was a rishi disguised as a deer roaming in the forest. The rishi had made himself and his wife a deer so that they could, whereas they couldn't if they were in human form. Why do such a thing? I don't know, but they did. And then just Pandu's luck, he shot that deer only. And he shot at the time when they were doing that only. So the rishi curses him. But this I read today, which is really sweet. Usually you think somebody shoots me, I curse you. There, normal human behavior. But that's not what happened. The rishi says, your sin for doing this action is so immense. Firstly, you've killed a brahmana, but I absorb you of that sin because you didn't know. Secondly, you broke the laws of hunting and you shot while the animal was in intercourse. Again, I know you didn't know, but you're still going to get all this sin. So to nullify your sins, I curse you. And I curse you that if you approach your wife with desire to do this action, you'll die instantly, just as I have died in the act of. So now, Pandu can't have children. After Bhishma tried so hard to ensure that there would be lineage, he got him 2 wives. Pandu can't touch either now, because the minute he touches them, he's going to die. I shouldn't laugh. I'm sure he was quite horrified. The wives were horrified. But I'm going to pause here, even though I want to say something else, which is also important, and talk about this. You know, the curse is, while I am in the act of intercourse, you have shot me, so I curse you that if you are ever in the act of intercourse, you will die. It becomes very tit for tat, and this is how people tend to understand karma. I slap you, you will slap me. This is how we tend to understand karma. We even say what goes around comes around. And of course, when we're explaining it to 4-year-olds, we'll even say, if you smile at someone, they'll smile back at you. But it's not so simple. It's not so tit for tat. It's the pain of, and it's the understanding, and it's also in these curses, there's the idea of us having empathy. Like, unless I put myself in that situation, I won't know what it feels like. But here, what I really wanted to emphasize, which I also only learned today, was this rishi was really quite sweet. He was trying to save Pandu from sin. He wasn't cursing. And I guess in that moment he was dying, so there wasn't that much time to think of what curse to give. So he gave this curse, and he does die. And Pandu is devastated. But the beautiful thing about Pandu, like I said, he turned out quite nice. And this would be because his mother did do tapas for 6 months while waiting for Vedavyasa to come back. When he is cursed, he accepts it. He sends notice to the kingdom that he won't be coming back to rule and that the Dhritarashtra should rule. And he decides to live in the forest near the rishis and the Santa Mahatma and the ashrams because he realized he's now going to have to live a life of self-control. And he's not going to be able to do that if he's back in the palace. And he wanted to live near ashramas and swamis and rishis because then that would help him to have the necessary self-control with which to live. Also, he thought about it and said, okay, well, if I can't touch my wives, well, might as well become a renunciate. And then now dedicate this life in something noble and higher than to just waste it. And so you see here, Pandu's thinking is quite mature. And he's not overwhelmed with emotions, plus he has logic, plus he aspires to improve. And this was a very interesting line when I read it, that the sorrows that we come to suffer are from the weaknesses in our personality. Pandu says this. There's some real gems in these side lines in the Mahabharata. And so Pandu himself says, my father gave in to lust and indulgence, which is Vichitravil. He's talking about Vichitravil, he's not talking about Vedavyasa. The Dhritarashtra and Pandu considered Vichitravir as their father. And as I mentioned in a previous class, it is written that Vichitravir did have a hunger for sensual enjoyment. And that brought about his downfall. I'm not sure exactly how it brought about his downfall, but he did get sick and he died, and we don't know the exact. He died of typhoid, so I'm not sure why that reference Pandu is made. But maybe he wasn't such an excellent king. He wasn't a dynamic, proactive, inspiring king because he was too busy indulging. Maybe that's what it's meant, because he wasn't much of a king. I don't know if that was for Dharma or just he was so busy with indulging. But that's what Pandu's line was, that the suffering came from the weakness. And then he's analyzing himself, and Pandu is saying, my weakness was hunting. And why would hunting be a weakness? And it's that desire for power, right? When you kill, it takes a certain mindset. There's the sense of control and power, which is why they did. They hunt for that reason. They hunt to have this sense of power. And then with any desire, a greed creeps in. All of us, right? All the time. We get something and then we want more, and then we want more, and we want more. And even now, literally today, it's been explained so much with Instagram and Facebook and social media. The minute you get a like or the minute you get a reaction, you get this dopamine hit and you get this high. And so then you want more, and then you want more, and then you want more. And so the same thing happens with hunting. You get this high of having this power and this control and this ability to destroy. And so Pandu had gotten infatuated with that. And so all our sufferings come from our weakness. So the greed for power, which led to hunting indiscriminately, now led to his suffering. And for Pandu to have this revelation and for him to say this shows incredible maturity of mind. It shows he had his insights and understanding, introspection, and it shows he's taking responsibility for his actions, and it shows he's wanting to improve his personality, having seen his faults. And this is why I personally like Pandu. Right? There's enough clarity of thought that I have done this. The suffering that I am facing right now, I have done. Am I a horrible person and that's why I'm suffering? No. And this is what's incredibly important for us to understand, because so many times I meet people, so many times, and something's happening in their life and it's hard because so many of us go through hardship, and they feel, the number of people that will say to me, you know, what horrible thing did I do that I am suffering? And usually the horrible thing we did was we were ignorant. We didn't realize that this thought pattern, this behavior will create an outcome. That whole conception creation. Like Kunti abandoned Karna. Did she know that she would never be a happier day in her life after that? Did she deserve to be happy? Of course she did. Everyone makes mistakes. Did Karna deserve to be happy? Of course he did. Could he have reprogrammed himself? Of course he could. But he didn't know he could. And Kunti didn't believe she deserved to be happy. And so for us too, like with Pandu, our suffering is usually because something we believe. It's usually something we believe that's causing our suffering. Can we reprogram it? Yes. And you know, so when we say we change and the world changes, and we change and then we don't have to suffer, it's really just this understanding has to come. And Pandu was so mature in this sense. He understood, right? I'm not a horrible person. Yes, I did kill a rishi. That, you know, there was an intent of murder. There was intent for hunting. Social norms in those days allowed Kshatriyas to hunt. Did he cross the line? He didn't knowingly cross the line. He was hunting with it, which is within Dharma. Kshatriyas were allowed to hunt. But his own reflection that he realized that it was the greed of the power that led him to not be cautious. And the minute I realize what it is in my thinking that makes me transcend what I know to be good conduct or intelligent way of living, I can immediately change it, and Pandu does. He immediately changes it. He says, I'm now going to live in the forest with the rishis in satsang, and I'm going to not just stay away from my wives. That's not the idea. I don't want to prolong my life. What I want to do is purify my mind so I no longer have this weakness, which is so, so beautiful that this is what Pandu dedicates himself to doing. He dedicates himself to purifying the weaknesses that he sees in himself, which has caused his suffering. And the reason I've elaborated on this is because Pandu's kids are noble. Because Pandu himself has this maturity, this insight. Of course, they're not his biological kids, but gosh, they called Pandavas, they called his kids. And so he's worthy of having these noble kids that are going to be born, who can't be born today because I've spoken too much. And I didn't get to tell the significance of what Gurudev wanted to tell in this episode of the Mahabharata of the kids being born. And actually the kids haven't even been born yet. I'm going far too slow. Anyways, we shall see everything next week. Everything means only the next bit. I don't know how much we'll see, but we'll see something next week. Any questions? You're laughing at me. Okay, good. Laughing is good. No questions? Okay, so last week's homework was conception and creation. This week's homework is, what is it, the weakness in me that is causing my suffering? I repeat, Not in me. Don't sit and think about my weaknesses. You all think about your weaknesses, okay? It's your homework. What is the weakness in you that is causing your suffering? My weaknesses I'm aware of. I talk too much. Chalo, let's stop. Everyone knows homework? Yes, you are thinking, what is the weakness? Ah, there's a question. Why Bhishma didn't assign Gandhavri to Dhritarashtra and not Pandu or Vidur? Yeah, that's a good question because Dhritarashtra was also blessed with 1,000 kids and Gandhavri was also blessed with 1,000 kids. It would have been better, right? If he gave him, I agree with you, Gabriella. But actually the reason was Gandhavri was the type of personality that would have accepted a blind husband. And Dhritarashtra was blind. And Bhishma knew that Gandhavri was compassionate enough, strong enough to accept him. Which is what Bhishma's reasoning in the Mahabharata was. But I can see where you're coming from. And Vidur wasn't, Vidur's marriage wasn't arranged. Vidur was born of the servant and wasn't considered royalty. Vidur figured out his own wife. And he got a really, really good wife who was as devoted as he was to Lord Shri Krishna. To the best of my understanding, that's the answer to that question. And it was Uddhav that was with Krishna. Satyaki was also with Krishna. But Satyaki died in the Yadavas fought. Okay, that's long, far away. We still have to, the Pandavas still have to be born only. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukha bhagave, asato ma satkamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam tamaya. Om Namita Purnamida Purnat Purnamadachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Guru Hari Om.